Hi, my name is Ashley Garner, and I'm an artist living in New York City. When I first started working in the fine art and fashion industries, I believed that I was setting aside my financial stability in the pursuit of something greater, of art. But what I quickly learned was that I was struggling financially for the benefit of someone else's already thick wallet. When I first moved here, I was coming from Miami. I had just graduated art school, and I was modeling and writing and doing photography. When I moved here, I landed a full-time job at a prominent international art fair in exhibitor relations, where essentially my job was to research, find new galleries, collect their names, reach out, contact them, and convince them to buy a booth within our fair. And what I really appreciated about that job was that I got to learn about the business of art. But as I worked there for longer and longer, it started to really depress me as an artist, because what I was seeing was the fact that the artists that were selling the most and getting the most press was usually the most unimpressive conceptual work. It was regurgitated pop culture or oversaturated abstract expressionism, and it just felt very empty. And coming from having just done art school, where you were learned how to come up with a concept and write your thesis statement, and what does this mean socially or politically or intuitively, and how is this helping elevate society, and yet here I was now at this art fair and seeing that the artists that were actually becoming successful were usually not creating work that was elevating society or was very interesting conceptually. It was about becoming a celebrity as an artist, and that's how you sell your work, or it was about which collector was buying your work and how much money were you selling for, and that's what made it good, or that's what made it popular. And it just started to really depress me as an artist. At the same time as working at this art fair, I was also contributing fashion photographer and writer for a handful of magazines, and all fashion magazines. And I was experiencing the same thing within the fashion industry. What I realized that they were most interested in publishing was the work that was the easiest to sell something through, that there was a marketing standpoint for it. And for me, that work was always my least exciting, or the work that I was most excited conceptually about or artistically about or visually about was the work that they said they couldn't share it because it didn't fit within their aesthetic, which really meant that it didn't fit with any of their advertisers, which is understandable to an extent. But when these are publications that are trying to share exciting, visually interesting work, and that is what they say their MO is, and yet they're not sharing that work, it was just this huge, again, explosion of realizing that it's not really about that the scene was much more about the business of it than it was about the art of it. As a fashion photographer, the way that you build your reputation is you do these shoots, your goal is to work with, the more shoots that you do, that you get to work with bigger makeup artists, better stylists, better models, you get a better team, so on and so forth, and that you will then get published by these magazines. But you're giving these magazines these editorials that you're doing on your own time, on your own dime, and then they are publishing it for free. They're not paying you for the editorial. They are paying you via TFP, or trade for press, where your payment is getting to be published on their platform. So you're pretty much starving as a fashion photographer until you're picked up by a creative agency, or you link up with designers that start paying you to shoot lookbooks, which is not editorials. That's not the fun stuff, I had a specific experience where finally, as a fashion photographer, I had gotten offered to shoot the cover of a highly distributed national magazine that was printed, hold it in your hands, and it was going to be a huge celebrity on the cover. I was so excited. I was like, this is it. This is the thing that I have been waiting for. This is going to be the thing to finally give me the platform to get jobs that will pay me. This is it. And of course I was going to do it no matter what. But when I asked them what the rate was for the job, they told me that there was no payment and that my payment would be getting to be the photographer for the cover of this magazine. And of course I did the shoot because I wasn't not going to shoot the cover. And what ended up, when the magazine came out and I put it out on my social media, absolutely nothing happened. It was one of my least, liked image. It didn't lead to getting better brands to lend me clothes. It didn't lead to another cover shoot or more editorials or anything whatsoever. It just happened. I just shot the cover of a magazine with a celebrity on it and didn't get paid. And that was really when I just was fed up with what the industry expected you to do as an artist, is just give them your work for free, and then they are getting paid off of it. And I was just done. Eventually, I got to a point where I was so fed up with the fashion industry, I was so fed up with what was happening in the fine art industry, that I decided to leave all of my jobs and go freelance. At the same time that happened, I was in this relationship where we were living together, we were working together, and it was beginning to collide in a very destructive way. And I was essentially having an emotional breakdown. I didn't have a steady job. I was working jobs that had absolutely nothing to do with making my art or about art. Just to be able to pay for rent and surviving in New York, I was having this love situation disintegrating in front of me. And essentially, I was having an identity crisis at this moment of just, how do I survive in New York as an artist? How do you do that and maintain your integrity or maintain your heart and soul and not have to sell it out for popularity? And thus was the creation of a body of work that led me into doing fine art photography called Mermaid Food. What Mermaid Food was all about was this response to this relationship disintegrating and this feelings of rage and this confusion and just disillusionment and anxiety and stress and heartache and just all of that being built up inside, and I didn't know how to release it other than to photograph these elements of fish and decay and just very rather grotesque things that were allowing me to feel like I could breathe when I was photoed. Once I took those photos, I felt like I was able to release that energy inside, and that was the only way I was able to release that energy, was by creating these images. The response that I had to that body of work, I started getting messages, but I got this one particular message from this girl I'd never met before, and she reached out to me saying that she had just seen my work that day, and the Mermaid Food photos were making her cry because she felt like she was able to release these emotions that had been anchored within her, and she never knew how to express them until she had seen those photos. And she literally thanked me for making my art. And it was so beautiful and amazing, and it just made me realize that my goal as an artist was not to work with bigger fashion magazines or better models or better fashion designers or whatever the fuck it was. My goal was to reach out and touch people like that, to have an emotional reaction to my work that allowed them to express themselves when they didn't know how to. And I never got that response when I was making fashion photography. Nobody ever reached out to me and said things like that. And it was never fulfilling in that way. It made me realize my goal as an artist was not to be able to name drop, but to be able to make powerful emotional work that could change somebody's life. That was what it's all about. It was not the press or the celebrity or the vanity or the materialism, even though, of course, all visual art is materialistic to an extent, but there's so much more that it can be. And that's what I am interested in doing. Throughout my time in New York, I have realized that there is a difference between being a creative technician and being an artist. And I think there are a lot of people that work in the visual arts who may be very great at what they do with the camera. They may be great at producing high quality work that is aesthetically pleasing, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're artists. And that's why I felt it was so important to start this series of telling the stories of those people who are not making work because they just want to make work, because they want to be able to work with the top designers or the top magazines or the top this or the top that, but because they need to make work, because it screams from their soul, because they literally don't know how to exist without being able to make their work, whatever it may be. And that is, I think, the pulse, that is the heartbeat of the visual arts industry. That is what it was all about, and it's not about that anymore. And it needs to get back to that, to the core of why we all started this shit in the first place. I never started this because I wanted to be able to, have a Rolls Royce or be published in Vogue. I started this because I didn't know how else to fucking exist without making my art. Because it was the only way that I could find sense in this world and sense in my existence in this world. And I think that there are a lot of people out there that feel the same way and that they're not being spoken for. And it's important that we hear their stories, because so many people are looking at the media and thinking that Vice or ID or Dazed and Confused or Vogue are an honest perspective of what's happening when it's not.